Hey there, welcome to episode 66 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 1:30 p.m., half one, if you like, on Thursday, February 27, 2025. Today we're going to be talking about whether we are all knowing how stuff works. It's almost impossible to know how everything works, but do we kind of know? Who knows? If you are new to the FFS Talk audio program, this is intended to be a conversational program, one without any guests, production by Street, one without any guests thus far, 66 episodes in, only solo audio episodes, audio essays in each episode. So I like to say that we're planting seeds for future discussions. If you are not familiar with what FFS means, you need to meet more Irish people. But I will say that basic idea is to ponder what works, what does not, and what we might do about it. So ultimately an optimistic endeavor, maybe, knowing how stuff works. So FFS Talk, one of these days we'll have guests and we'll see how things unfold. Feel free to listen in on any episodes. Just recently finished up the Crowd Wisdom miniseries. And I suppose knowing how stuff works does factor into that. So we'll say that this is adjacent to the Crowd Wisdom miniseries, but it stands on its own. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes and a summary, which I will read to you now, soon, very soon, but not right now. And then some links. This week, I chose not to dive into relevant links, basically because you can pick a thing that you are curious about, and there are millions, maybe, of links, some good, some poor, some AI generated, which I would classify as poor, some from subject matter experts, some from comedians with podcasts. Who knows what's going on out there, but there are so many possibilities. I didn't want to overemphasize any particular starting point. So I'm going to have some examples of things that, or stuff, I should say, stuff that we should know how they work. But I will leave it to you, listener, to pick a point to begin doing your own research, which we're all experts at now. So let's begin. So the links will be the shameless self-promotion links as usual. So the summary of today's episode, way back in episode 15 of this very program, we went into the notion that there are connections that we know about and that we do not know about between people and systems and things in general. I guess I could say stuff, but I'll say things that we all interact with, maybe depend upon on a daily basis. Should we have some idea how these things work? Probably, or we can remain blissfully ignorant. The links for today's episode, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and Ko-fi.com, technically ko-fi.com/DanHugo. That's DANHUGO for both. Buymeacoffee.com has a profile page that I use as a freeform link tree. It has links to all of my audio programs, GitHub repositories, some biographical information, some other stuff, and published exclusively on buymeacoffee.com, the Buy Me an Update microcast, which I publish on Mondays. We're coming up on episode 14. It's a reflection on the audio programs published in the prior week, and then whatever's coming up for the current week. So Monday morning, Monday, midday, maybe, trying to get it in the morning. It's a general update, so I can do that across all of my stuff. So it could apply to the audio programs. So far it has, but it also could apply to some other things. And so far it has sometimes. So there you go. So buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. Go to the posts section, which is linked at the top of the web page. If you're using the application, I don't know exactly where that is, but if you are viewing the Dan Hugo profile page, very top, I also link to the posts section. And there are audio posts that are hosted right there on buymeacoffee.com. Ko-fi.com does not enable hosting of audio, so I post some textual updates there. By the way, you're not obligated in any way to spend money at either of these sites, though you're welcome to any funds that flow through either of these platforms, which are normally used by content creators and open source developers and others with an audience or a user base or people they just want to reach out to and engage with. Some use them specifically for fundraising. It's basically like a tip jar in my case. So if you would like to contribute to the coffee supply, feel free. Don't feel obligated. And on that note, let's get on with the show. So we live in an ever more complicated world. I don't think anyone would argue with that. Perhaps that's true. That complication is a way of life in these modern times. I guess it could be worse. If you today had to endure candlelight and travel by horse, not even horse and buggy, but a horse, you would probably choose the modernity over that. But, who can say? More people, more technologies, more gadgetry, more biological risk factors, and the list goes on and on and on. And the vast majority of these things are well beyond our individual control, much less understanding. For better or worse, the last 2 or 3 decades have actually accelerated our cultural need for complication in the form of technology and infrastructure and interaction that is always at the leading edge. That's where the profit is. So always got to be growing and doing more and faster and bigger and sometimes breaking things, which is a dumb idea in my opinion, so that we all feel we benefit in some way from these. So as long as everything's going on, we have that feeling like, okay, this is good, so that we benefit from these convenient and entertaining shiny things, which over time become less and less transparent to us. So we really do not quite know how these things work. I think it would be hard to argue against that. Even if you understand one thing really well, there's a lot of things that you probably don't, and then other people will understand some other thing. I understand several things. I'm not saying you only understand one, but there are some things that we each will become much more familiar with through expertise development with hands-on experience or education or whatever the case may be. But there are simply too many things to really comprehend, to actually comprehend. You can argue with me if you like. Unfortunately, as more and more things we encounter daily become more and more complicated, we are less and less likely to have the time or inclination to try to figure out the details or to completely understand implications, so we let them slide with potentially negative outcomes sometime in the future. If we cannot connect an effect with a cause, the outcome is yet more complication. So if I move, let's see, I can't think of something I would do that would impact a lot of people. But if I put a ramp at an intersection corner, but I don't have the traction component that would make it ADA compliant, yellow bumpy surface, that may impact people, a year or two from now, because when I put in that corner, so say I work for Public Works for my city. When I put that in, I didn't ask anyone what they thought, and so a year or two from now, somebody might slide or trip or do, something will happen to somebody, and the cause of that will have been this decision to not make it ADA compliant, and that it slipped through was problematic, but the effect will happen so much later that it doesn't really go back to the root cause. It's just, oh, well, that happened. Let's fix the problem, not address the cause. So that's just an example. I should have come up with an example prior, but it's probably a bad example. But I did come up with some examples in general. So now to the a couple of examples section. Obviously, the times we find ourselves in at the moment are certainly interesting. I don't know if that's in a good way. A couple of things come to mind immediately. The price of eggs. Pause for laughter. Or groans. The price of eggs does not correlate with what politicians and economists call a good economy. They are an indication of quite the opposite to the casual observer. Unless we keep track of bird flu outbreaks and chicken population culling to try to stop the continued spread of bird flu, then we may not know what the cause is. So we will hear that it simply contradicts our notion of what a good economy is. We are not tracking this, anywhere near so closely as we as a general population did with SARS-CoV-2 and COVID in 2020 and into 2021. There are no graphs and charts and daily reports and updates from the likes of Johns Hopkins and the CDC and the global health community, the World Health Organization, and so on. This is much farther and further under the radar, so to speak. So we're just not keeping an eye. So we blame egg prices on politicians and make decisions accordingly. Prices on politicians. Do you know what end-to-end encryption is? Even if you think you do, there are some details that are not always made clear, which is why Telegram, for example, is not so popular, but Signal is, more so anyway, and so on. And by the way, who is not encrypting their email? Most people. They leave it to Google to do with their own encryption, but I say encrypt your own email. Private communications are always important, often critical, and sometimes life and death. Is it life or death? Life and death. One of those. Both. Yet the intricacies of the mathematics and the protocols and, of course, the policies. Skipping a line there. Policies and regulations in place in your country, your locality. These can all make things super complicated. Not to mention whether someone somewhere has required a backdoor to enable easy decryption or easy peering into your communications without your knowledge, which itself could be exploited by anyone if they find it. That has happened. Fun fact, I used to work at Netscape many years ago when cryptography was considered a munition, like a weapon. So it was treated accordingly and you couldn't export it, and there was all sorts of stuff going on. It was one of those things that people didn't understand. And let us not even begin to travel the road towards quantum computing and Shor's algorithm, which is a way to use quantum computing to very quickly factor large numbers, like prime factorization, which is the basis for public key cryptography. So if you can efficiently factor, prime number factorization is the thing. So if you can efficiently factor large numbers, then you can break encryption capital M, much more quickly than most people were considering when the public key cryptography scheme was devised. And the fun thing is that anything that's encrypted out in the world today could be decrypted. So anything that's out there that someone would like to peer into long after it was relevant, but could be consequential in some way, decrypting that old stuff could become a matter of minutes or hours instead of millennia. They used to say it's secure against a well-funded adversary, but that could suddenly go away. So we'll see how that goes. But the same could apply to some forms of end-to-end encryption, whether it's email or voice or messaging, etc. This is complicated. It's complicated stuff. And if you don't understand even an inkling of what's going on, if you don't have an inkling, then when encryption breaks, it will happen to you. And that's no good. We all carry around pocket computers that have made our lives easier until we reflect on just how much personal tracking is taking place at a scale beyond the imagination. Location is the obvious one, but there's other forms going on. There's other, like, what are you clicking on? When are you using your phone? Who are you talking to? If you're not using end-to-end encryption, whether there's a backdoor, hey, Apple, can you just decrypt this person's phone for me? Sure. In exchange for the convenience of route planning on a map, we can be convinced to enable location sharing for just about any application on our device. In other words, this device requires fine location for whatever reason. And so that location information will be shared to whoever wrote the software, and then from there, who knows? And we have no idea who is doing what with that data. It could be good, it could be bad. We simply have no idea. Hint. Sometimes your local law enforcement will gather location data around a crime scene to aid in selecting and pursuing persons of interest. In other words, if you happen to be near where something happened, you might become a person of interest. This is not a great thing. It's a complication of sharing your location information with people that, or services or entities that are not always transparent with you until you get a knock on your door and they say, we understand you were near this place at this time. And you think to yourself, was I? Your phone knows. And so does everyone else. There are countless scenarios unfolding as I speak today at the federal government level regarding civil servants, and these are employees of various federal government agencies or were funded programs and various other things that are being laid off or shut down or otherwise culled to save an amount of money that is a tiny fraction of the annual budget of our government here in the United States. The largest component of our annual spend is debt service. Fun fact. I will leave that to you to track down debt service and then military. Debt service. People call them entitlements, but it's social security net. So Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. That's why those are in the headlines as I speak today. But when you listen to this, that might be settled cuts. So to say that the total budget, the infrastructure of our country and its government and the mechanisms used to maintain it and make it go are not among the most complicated, even complex things ever conceived by humans would be an understatement. No surprise then that most people barely scratch the surface of awareness, let alone actual comprehension. And I know nothing really in this realm. I mean, we can read on the internets and whatnot, but if you're not in civil service, if you're not sort of functioning in the procurement-driven world of the federal government and understanding how systems work. I've talked about before the Recoding America book written by Jennifer Polka, who was the founder of Code for America, for example. There's a production by a street. There's a hint, but from what I glimpse, there is no way to properly understand the vastness, the scope and grandeur of the federal government in the United States, maybe in other countries as well. So to claim that you understand what's going on after a couple of days, yeah. So we, as normal everyday people, might not even know just how much impact some actions, changes, and so on will have on us for some time. And then we may not even directly connect what's happening today with the outcomes and results and impact and possibly negative outcomes that we might experience, 6 months, a year, 10 years from now. Who knows? Trickle down economics. Took a while, but we're still feeling that one. Some of the complications which impact us have a delayed effect or some effect at a distance. So I was just saying that about the trickle down. Supply side economics, if you like. Some effect at a distance, not unlike the butterfly flapping its wings on the other side of the world. So we don't always get the direct result that we can correlate to that flapping of the wings in an easy way or in a way that we can observe, right? Who even knows if a butterfly is flapping its wings on the other side of the world? It probably, but the impacts might be felt, again, hours, production by street, noisy day today. The impact of such flapping might be felt hours, days, weeks, months, years, generations later. And then who knows, right? If we are not completely aware of what person or system might have a direct impact on the moment, at the moment some action is taken, that action might ripple through the universe and come back an hour or a decade later, and perhaps in completely unexpected ways. Population demographics are one such area where the impact of events and actions today may take decades or generations to be fully realized and understood. This is generally true when there's a war or a famine or an outbreak, like a pandemic. There are very fast population changes. There's a saying, it's today's February 27th. You will know exactly by the end of the day today, you will know exactly what the maximum number of 50-year-old people will be with the birthday of February 27th, 50 years from today, because they are all born today. So however many of those people are lost, we'll say, keep it generic, the maximum number of 50-year-old people 50 years from today, you already know that number. So it will only be less than that number. So people who plan for and account for population of countries, of regions, they have these numbers to work with. And that's where, if you've ever heard the replacement rate is 2.1 offspring per couple. So that's one. So if you assume two parents, then one child per parent replaces that parent when they move along. And it's 2.1 because some people will not make it. So unfortunately, not making light of that. And so 2.1 accounts for the possibility that one of those two people will not make it. So in order to keep your population in a stable count, stable number, you need 2.1 offspring per couple. Obviously, this doesn't account for changes in family dynamics and divorces and remarriages and out of wedlock and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So just in the simplest terms, 2.1. So if it becomes less than that, or if the 0.1 becomes a larger number, that is to say war, pandemics, pestilence, right? Then the population would decline. And again, you can't have, on February 28th, we can't say, oh, let's have more people that will turn 50 on February 27th. That's too late. So at any given time, the maximum number of people that will reach a certain age at that time from today has been set, right? And the number of people who will be 50 years old plus one day on February 27th, 2075 is also known, right? These are maximum values, so they will only be less than that. And that's the things that happen now will impact how far below that maximum number the total is 50 years from now. So things will take some time, and it's hard to predict, but you absolutely know what the maximum number will be. When you think about it that way, it's kind of interesting, because then when you have wars or there are pandemics that go unaddressed, or if we completely ignore science and we listen to comedians, and I love comedians, but they're not scientists usually, those things take a while to have an impact, but they do have an impact. Some of the systems we encounter are actually complex, such that they cannot be fully understood. I've talked about this previously. So complicated is something that we may not directly understand, but that can be understood. A recipe, or no, not a recipe. How about a puzzle? A puzzle with a million pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle, is complicated because it's got a lot of pieces, but there's a beginning and an end, and you can judge your progress. And even though it will take a long time, it is possible to solve. There are production steps. I think it's the production of a completely functional and worthwhile tungsten filament for a light bulb. I think this is the story. I think the person that finally figured out how to make a filament for an incandescent light bulb that lasts, I think he said it was like 180 steps or 130 steps, some immense number of steps, a complicated process that took quite a bit of effort to derive, but one that is ultimately easily described and reproduced. It's just a lot of steps. So that's complication. Complex is something that may not be describable or which might not be factorable, right? Complex systems are like the three-body problem, weather. There are so many moving parts that it's almost impossible to even conceive of a way to model, describe, and completely understand. So some things that might seem complex are actually complicated. It's just that we, as normal people, don't understand what a PhD subject matter expert might understand. Either way, I would argue that some things are complex to the casual observer. Hey, I was just saying this, but complicated to subject matter experts. But that's arguable. So you can come to me and say, you don't know what you're talking about. And I would probably agree with you. The most expert virologist, for example, knows that bird flu is complicated. The most expert epidemiologist knows how complicated the spread of measles is through a given population. To the casual observer who gets their information from Dave Smith or others in their podcast, Dave Smith is a libertarian comedian who loves debate bro action. These two things are immensely complex issues tackled with false correlations as causation, which is a dramatic problem which I cannot really even convey the magnitude of. But thinking you know how a complex system works without understanding, especially if it's actually complicated, some people would argue that immunology is a complex field because it kind of is. There's a tremendous amount of stuff that people don't understand about immunology. The human immunological system is kind of amazing. I've read a couple books on this, but absolutely fascinating. There are people that understand a lot and that understand where it gets complicated and where it's complex. To the casual observer, though, it is absolutely complex, and I would never believe someone who has not got decades in on immunology, virology, or epidemiology, or all three. Dan, you read a book. I know nothing. I would never claim. I do know what I don't know, and it's most of the thing when it comes to those areas. So to believe that a YouTuber who has a degree in stand-up comedy can tell you how these things work is laughable and also dangerous. So know how stuff works, or know when you don't know how stuff works. How about that? So solving this is a challenge. We are not going to solve this during this episode of FFS Talks. Sad to say, we can be absolutely certain that this is the case. The first step is understanding that we do not know most things. The sum total of things that I have knowledge of is a sliver of the sum total of things to have knowledge of, if that makes sense. Because there are too many things. There are too many things to know. Some may be motivated to do some of their own research. I did my own research. And I do that too. I read a lot. I read a tremendous amount because I do know that I don't know, and I try to figure out what I don't know at least. And then the question is where that research is performed and whether the outcome of that research is honest and valid and hopefully current. That may or may not be the case at scale. So a population of 1 million or 10 million or 300 million people doing their own research, who knows? Who knows what they're going to come up with? All manner of biases enter that picture. Confirmation bias, one of the worst. And motivated reasoning doesn't help. I talk about those things a lot because they are ubiquitous. The beginning of the beginning is, of course, to know what we do not know. One of the only useful statements Donald Rumsfeld ever made, sorry, I'm not a huge fan, was in this regard. It goes something like this, and he's kind of famous. In fact, he wrote a book, Knowns and Unknowns, I think it is. So quoting Donald Rumsfeld when he was the Secretary of Defense in 2000, 2001. I mean, he made this quote. I think it was directly related to 9/11 attacks in 2001. Reports say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. And if you really think about that, it is a profound statement. If you don't know something, then you may take steps or enable certain steps to be taken that are ultimately dangerous or generally bad because you just didn't know that you didn't know. If you know that you don't know, then you can at least initiate some sort of whoa, let's ask some questions before we take this action. But if there are things that you don't know, then you can make some very bad decisions. That's probably what he was trying to say, but ultimately Donald Rumsfeld was kind of I'll just leave it there. So to end this episode, to close the point that I will make today, the days of driving a car with a standard transmission and a clutch pedal are likely behind us, unless you have a classic car. But I don't even know if they make cars with a transmission anymore. Perhaps trucks that are intended for towing a trailer or whatnot. Obviously, non-electric transport vehicles, diesel trucks, 18-wheelers if you like. Fun fact, electric vehicles, the torque curve is very different from a internal combustion engine, diesel or otherwise. So the need to shift the gear ratios so that you maintain torque in the power band changes drastically. So if there are electric vehicles that are used for towing cargo and or towing trailers or whatnot, the power curve is just very different. So shifting a transmission, a gearbox, is a totally different matter. But if you are driving a classic car and you have to understand how the transmission works, when to do the clutch, when to let the clutch out, how to apply gas so you don't stall, et cetera, et cetera. This is not true of most things, all right? So automatic transmissions have kind of taken over and may not even be necessary in electric vehicles. This is not true of most things, however, such that where we were all told in the old days that learning how to drive a car with a standard transmission was important, just in case that was all that was available in an emergency, we all need to be aware of the systems and, in some cases, the people in the world that have small or large impact on us as individuals and as groups, how they work, and what they can do to us for good or otherwise as a baseline of comprehension. In case of emergency at the very least, read, ask questions, be curious, and learn where to seek answers. In other words, just because you're never going to drive a standard transmission vehicle back in the old days, you should still learn how it works just in case. Similarly, you listening to this are probably not going to be an immunologist. You're probably not going to be production by a street. You're probably not going to be an economist. Maybe you are, statistically though. You're probably not going to do a lot of things. So why should I understand that? Why should I know how that works? Why should people understand how farming works? Why should people understand how agriculture works? I think there was a statement made recently. People who live in urban areas, I think it was a farmer who said this. It said, ask someone who lives in the big city where water comes from, and they'll say a plastic bottle. So they laugh because farmers know what's up. Farmers know where water comes from, and they know where it goes, and they know how it comes back to them later. Big city folks, not so much. So if you don't understand how systems work, and those systems are critical to your existence, they are important to your survival, they're useful for your comfort, then it might be important to understand at least a little bit and to definitely be aware of how to find out what's happening, how to know how stuff works. Knowing how stuff works is important, and it would make a good title for today's episode. On that note, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Take care.